like to thank the organizers for inviting me to this very important conversation. This is work very dear to my heart. I've been involved in interfaith work for at least a couple of decades, and at some point I became disenchanted with interfaith dialogue because that was simply all that we did, dialogue. And I felt the need to move out into the world a bit more, into the streets, quite literally, and touch people's lives. And it was years later that I was called back under the inspiration of Dean Morton, who is the former dean of the Cathedral of St. John the Divine. And I'm now one of the trustees of the Interfaith Center of New York. And what inspired me to join the Interfaith Center of New York is because it spoke about making our faith speak to our actions and touch people where they lived. So I like this conversation about interfaith dialogue and how do we move it into the world where people live. I am very consciously aware of Professor Shipman's talk. That is certainly one reading of Islamic history. There are others, of course. And the gentleman who spoke just now about the work that religion really has to play in the world, and especially today. We are very much aware of the horrors that are taking place in the world now. And it's global, but locally we have something to say and something to do about that. Means making our faiths work in the communities and touch the lives where we live. Now, what I want to share with you today is a document that was recently created post 9/11. But before I share that document with you, I have some copies, and I'd like to share those with you, and you can read them later just for a deeper understanding of the work that's unfolding here. There is a document that's called the Constitution of the Islamic State of Medina. And this is a centuries-old constitution that was actually put to paper by the Prophet Muhammad himself, peace be upon him. And this Medina Charter, as it's known, spoke about the citizenship of all people of the state and the protections that were granted to all of the citizens of the Islamic State of Medina. And so that is a very important conversation that we need to educate ourselves about, both within the Islamic community and more broadly. Now, in this Medina Charter, there are several articles there, and it is granting all kinds of rights of citizenship to the people who live there. And it was by no means a Muslim majority country or at the time. So it's an important piece to keep in mind, and again, especially in this current climate, as we seek those kinds of protections for ourselves right here at home in the United States. Now, more recently, we joined with an eminent Islamic scholar, Sheikh Abdullah bin Bayya, who is a well-respected, world-respected legal scholar in the Islamic tradition, and he formed an organization called Promoting Peace in Muslim-Majority Societies. And what this organization seeks to do is to provide the understanding based on the original Medina Charter but to update it, and this was done in Marrakesh in Morocco last year actually, with a document called the Marrakesh Declaration. And what the Marrakesh Declaration does is build on the Medina Charter, but bring it forward so that we can utilize in a current context. So that is a very important piece of work that is unfolding, that gives, first and foremost, it seeks to educate that there is this precedent in Islamic society, right? Not post 9/11, but some centuries ago, right? That spoke about citizenship and the rights of people within those societies. Also, in the context of that, what we're trying to do here now is broaden that conversation. It's certainly an interfaith document. As you may know, in early Islamic history, at one point during the time of the Prophet Muhammad, they were very much ostracized, the Muslims in those societies, and they were taken in by the king at that time of Ethiopia, who was Christian. And so this again reminds us of an incredible interfaith moment historically where Christians were the protectors of Muslims. And of course we have those kinds of stories to talk about how Muslims have protected other religious minorities, and not just Jewish communities, but others as well. So I wanted to point out again this story of the migration to Ethiopia by Muslims who were at that time very powerless and persecuted and oppressed. So these are historical realities, lessons that I encourage us to revisit. And again, because of the climate that we're living in, and I appreciate the gentleman veering off a bit to bring us into reality again about the politics of our time and how, especially at this time, religion really matters, yeah? And it means religion at the deepest level, you know, at the spiritual level. So I'm hopeful that despite the climate, or maybe because of the climate that we live in now, it becomes an incredible opportunity for us to open our hearts to the other and see what is really behind that, right? Often we will find in a city like New York, for instance, it's impossible to do any kind of engagement in the city without interacting with a Muslim. Virtually impossible, whether we know it or not. Muslims are just everywhere, and we interact with them every day, all day. Now, there is a deeper history of Islam in this part of the world, right? We also know about the transatlantic slave trade, and many of those Africans, reputable scholars say up to 30% of those Africans who were brought here and enslaved were actually Muslims. So we're beginning to ask our scholars to dig a little deeper and tell us what happened to those people. How did they sustain themselves? And what is the result of that kind of condition? And the way that people sustained themselves through their faith under horrendous conditions to continue to practice their religion and empower themselves spiritually. So I hope that we can find a way. I do like the idea of once we've gotten through all of the easy questions about how much we have in common, you know, and kumbaya, yeah, that we are courageous enough to get really deep and ask the very difficult questions. And I hope that you'll do that today, you know, to not hold back, but to ask the hard questions, because that's how we get past the blockage that we have, and we can have a breakthrough and an opening, God willing. So yeah, we know what our commonalities are, but we have to also be courageous enough and really so deeply inclined in our faith that we are not fearful of encountering the other. And as someone has said, through my years of interfaith work, I've found my interaction with people from other faith traditions, and it is not restricted to the Abrahamic faiths. And it's another conversation that I'd like to throw out at us also when we talk about interfaith dialogue. Usually we're talking about Jews, Muslims, and Christians. But there is a whole world out there of other religious traditions. And we need to be conscious and consciously include them when we speak about interfaith dialogue. So I advocate for that. But being in this community of interfaith workers for social justice, and that's where I really come down with the efficacy of what our faith traditions can mean to bringing harmony in the world, is that if we can make our religion speak to social justice issues, we seek justice, we demand justice, we advocate for justice, but we also bring along with that advocacy the capacity for compassion and mercy, yeah? So, but we must insist on justice for all. One of the things that we try to do in our work is to find the people who are already doing the work in the community, who are not part of our faith community, but they share the same passion for social justice, right? So we love to align ourselves with those people because it's not at that point about our individual faiths, but it's about moving the human condition forward. So this is really where the gold is, that's where the oil is, where people can come together despite their differences that are, in most instances, are quite superficial, right? But maybe because of their differences, that they can find something in common, and it usually resolves around the issue of the day that often has historical roots, yeah? But if we can find a way to be brave enough to align ourselves with those people, right? There is a verse in Quran that talks about standing up for justice, even if it's against our own selves, right? And that's like, marching order for many of us, that we can't be selective in our judgment. We can't be selective in our outrage, that if it's harmful, Dr. King talks about the illusion of justice, if one person is wronged, then we're all wronged. And if we make those wrongs right, then we all benefit from that. So again, I want to posit and leave you with these two documents. The Medina Charter, which guaranteed the rights, citizenship rights, of people who were not part of the Muslim community, but they lived in the society. It guaranteed their rights, right? And the Marrakesh Declaration, which is a recent document that happened only last year, is seeking to build on that document, move it forward so that we can speak to a lot of the extremism in the world that happens, but we are also very clear that extremism does not just happen in a vacuum, right? That when we talk about extremism, we have to be also willing to look at some of the extenuating circumstances, some of the motivating forces, like many of the oppressions, many of the injustices that we find ourselves as individuals often complicit in, right? So to have our faiths speak to our actions, that what we want for ourselves, we want for other people as well. Do unto others as we would have them do unto us. So again, I look forward to your, I hope, tough questions in this context, because we're in a critical moment now, and we can't afford to hold back. We need to bring all of our spiritual ammunition and make this a more perfect union not just for ourselves and our own families, but for our children and their children. Thank you so much.